When a man learns to detach emotionally, not out of bitterness, but out of awareness, he steps into a level of power most people never reach. It's not about being cold. It's not about shutting off feelings or pretending not to care. It's about understanding that your emotions are yours to master, not hers to provoke, manipulate, or control. When you reach that place, you no longer respond to her silence with panic. You no longer try to fix what isn't asking to be fixed, and you certainly don't chase validation that was never yours to begin with. What happens when you detach is subtle, but it's undeniable. She feels that the energy shifts. The man who once reacted quickly now responds slowly, if at all. The one who used to initiate every conversation now lets silence do the talking. And in that silence, something powerful is communicated. He no longer needs her attention to feel grounded in his identity. That is rare. That is unforgettable. Most women are used to being pursued. It's the dynamic they've known their whole lives. Attention flows easily. Validation is a given, and men compete to earn their time. But when they meet a man who isn't swayed by charm, who isn't entangled in emotional games, who doesn't lean forward just because she leaned back, she doesn't feel in control anymore. And it's that loss of control, that unfamiliar space, that creates tension inside her. She starts to wonder, why isn't he reacting? Why isn't he chasing? What makes him so still in the face of my absence? Emotional detachment is not withdrawal, it's elevation. It means you're no longer operating from fear. You're no longer driven by the need to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. And because of that, you're immune to the manipulations that work on men who are emotionally desperate. When she tries to test your boundaries, you don't break. When she pulls away to see if you'll chase, you don't. When she sends mixed signals, you ignore the noise and stay focused on clarity. That's not indifference. In a world where attention is currency, withholding it wisely is power. She may not show it right away, but your detachment will echo in her thoughts. It will challenge her sense of control. It will interrupt her assumptions. Because when you no longer feel the need to chase, she feels the pull to understand why. And that pull is the beginning of a power shift. And once that shift happens, the man who used to be an option becomes the standard. Most men misunderstand the idea of presence. They think it's about constantly being available, showing affection at every turn, texting back immediately, or proving their care through constant attention. But that's not presence, that's performance. True presence doesn't come from frequency, it comes from depth. A man who is grounded, centered, and calm in his own being doesn't need to chase. His presence, when felt, leaves an impact that lingers long after the moment has passed. You don't gain power by pursuing constantly. You gain power by being so rooted in who you are that when you do show up, your energy changes the atmosphere. When you speak, it carries weight. When you listen, it feels intentional. There's no desperation, no anxiety behind your gestures. You're not trying to be liked. You're not proving your worth. You're simply there. And that alone commands more attention than 1,000 needy texts. Most women are overwhelmed by shallow attention. They get messages, compliments, emojis from men all day long. But what they rarely experience is a man who doesn't flinch when she pulls back, a man who doesn't collapse emotionally when she creates distance, a man who is fully present when he's there and fully at peace when he's not. That man stands out not because he's louder or flashier, but because his energy is stable. And in a world full of chaos, stability is power. The man who stops chasing and chooses instead to be rooted in his own path becomes magnetic in a different way. He's not trying to get her to respond. He's not adjusting himself to fit her mood. He's aligned with something bigger, his vision, his purpose, his direction. And that quiet confidence, that unwavering presence makes her stop and think, because suddenly she's not the center of his world. And that makes her wonder why. What she begins to feel is the absence of emotional pursuit, the lack of that constant checking in, seeking, pleasing. And the silence doesn't feel like neglect, it feels like a mirror. She starts to wonder if she misjudged him, if maybe he was more than just another man seeking validation, if maybe he was the one with the power all along and she simply didn't recognize it because she was too focused on herself. When a man stops chasing and starts leading with presence, everything changes. He becomes the type of man who doesn't just take up space, he defines it. Self-control is one of the rarest traits a man can develop, not because it's out of reach, but because so few are willing to do the internal work required to master it. In relationships especially, men often believe that emotion equals action, that if they feel something deeply, they must express it, chase it, or react to it. But power doesn't come from acting on every impulse. It comes from understanding that your ability to pause, observe, and respond, not react, is the very thing that separates you from the rest. A man who lacks self-control becomes easy to manipulate. One moment she pulls away slightly and he's already reaching out. She goes cold and he starts questioning himself. She withdraws affection and he increases his efforts. This makes him predictable. It makes him emotionally available on demand, which doesn't build respect, it builds dependence. And dependence is never attractive. But the man who can remain composed in the face of distance or silence, that man becomes a mystery. And mystery is compelling. Self-control doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't let your care override your dignity. You don't need to explain your worth, defend your feelings, or plead for connection. You observe the dynamic with clarity. You see when the energy shifts, and instead of panicking, you stay rooted. That restraint communicates something stronger than words ever could. You are not a slave to your emotions. You feel them, but they don't lead you. And that discipline, especially in moments when most men would fold, creates gravity. A woman may test your emotional control, sometimes without even realizing it. She wants to know if you can handle her pullbacks without unraveling. She wants to know if you'll lose yourself trying to win her. But when she finds that you can desire her without needing her, that you can want her without worshiping her, and that your behavior doesn't change based on how much validation she gives, that's when she begins to respect you. Because now you're no longer operating from scarcity, you're leading from strength. To command a woman's respect and attention long term, you must master the ability to stay calm when everything inside of you wants to reach out, to sit with discomfort without trying to fix it, to allow space without rushing to fill it. That's how you demonstrate value without ever needing to speak it. The man who owns his emotions never needs to chase approval. He becomes the one who sets the tone. The moment a man pulls back, not out of resentment but out of clarity, a shift begins. When you've been pursuing, initiating, giving, and suddenly there's silence, it creates a contrast that can't be ignored. And it's in that contrast where reflection begins. Not just for you, but for her. She starts to notice the absence of your presence. The lack of energy you once poured into her now hangs in the air like a quiet void. And that void does something powerful. It invites her to think. See, most people don't stop to evaluate a relationship when things are moving quickly. When you're always there, always responding, always trying, it becomes the rhythm, predictable, safe, even taken for granted. But when that rhythm breaks, when your energy disappears from her life without a grand announcement, it triggers an internal disruption. She may not show it immediately. She might even pretend it doesn't affect her, but human nature is wired to react to absence. And if there is any real connection between you, that reaction will come. This is where your restraint matters, because it's tempting to break the silence. It's tempting to explain why you stopped, but explanation defeats the purpose. The silence is the message. It says, I've recognized the imbalance. I'm no longer going to feed something that doesn't feed me. Not from anger, not from revenge, just from self-respect. And ironically, that calm, quiet withdrawal often says more than anything you could have shouted during conflict. In that space, something unexpected happens. She starts to replay things. Not just what happened at the end, but everything you did before. The attention, the effort, the patience. All the things that may have been overlooked suddenly come into sharp focus because now there's a before and after. And the after feels colder than she expected. And the colder it feels, the more she wonders if she misunderstood who you were, or worse, if she misjudged the value of what she had. Reflection is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. And sometimes the only way someone realizes your worth is when you take it with you. Not dramatically, not with a scene, but simply by stepping back and letting the silence speak. that's when she has to confront her own behavior. That's when she's forced to consider that maybe you weren't too much, maybe she gave too little, and maybe, just maybe, she'll come to understand that your silence wasn't rejection, it was self-reset. And self-reset always speaks louder than words. One of the most powerful realizations you can come to is this: you don't need to prove your value to anyone who's not making an effort to recognize it. So many men fall into the trap of overcompensating, trying harder, explaining themselves, offering more, just to earn a response, just to be acknowledged. But the truth is, when you're constantly trying to prove your worth, you're not showing confidence, you're showing uncertainty. And that energy is felt. People are drawn to what they can't quite predict, to what holds a sense of quiet strength. When you stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you simply live with integrity and let your actions speak for you, something shifts. You remove the pressure. You eliminate the emotional noise, and without even realizing it, you become the one who holds the frame. Not because you're trying to control her, but because you've taken control of yourself. And that moment when she feels you're no longer trying to convince her, that's when curiosity starts creeping in. She wonders why. She questions if she misread the situation. She starts to examine whether she pushed too far or pulled away too quickly. And in that space, something else happens. She starts to respect the boundary you created. Because boundaries, when held firmly but without bitterness, are deeply attractive. They signal that your self-worth isn't negotiable, and that no amount of silence, distance, or mixed signals will make you forget who you are. And this is where the dynamic reverses. What once felt like power on her side starts to dissolve because she no longer has the assurance of your continued attention. The moment you stop trying, you stop feeding the pattern. And when that pattern breaks, so does the illusion of control. Now she's left to face what it really means to be without your presence. Not just your attention, but your consistency, your interest, your effort. It's important to understand this isn't about playing games or manipulating emotions. It's about stepping back from situations where your presence is not matched by appreciation. It's about conserving your energy for someone who recognizes its value, not someone who needs to lose it to see it. And often, that withdrawal will echo louder in her mind than any message you could have sent. It will stay with her, linger, create a space she can't quite fill, and in that space, the truth about your worth becomes undeniable. Sometimes the most haunting thing you can leave behind is the silence of no longer trying. There's a unique kind of discomfort that settles in when someone realizes they no longer occupy the same space in your life, not because you made a grand exit, not because you yelled or slammed the door, but because you quietly stopped showing up. And that silence, especially when it comes from someone who was once emotionally present, is deeply unsettling. It lingers. It echoes louder than any confrontation ever could. When you stop reaching out, when you stop initiating conversations or checking in, it doesn't go unnoticed. At first she might rationalize it, tell herself you're just busy, maybe you lost interest, maybe you're playing games, but over time, that narrative breaks down because silence isn't passive, it's active, it has intention. It shows you made a choice. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And that realization is what begins to haunt her. She may try to act unaffected. She may post more on social media, go out with friends, or throw herself into distractions. But none of that silences the question that keeps rising in her mind. Why did he really stop? It's not the absence itself that causes discomfort. It's the unknown. The part of her that once felt certain about your presence now has to sit with ambiguity. And uncertainty has a way of forcing reflection. That reflection isn't always immediate. Sometimes it comes in waves, a memory triggered by a place, a song, a scent, a moment where she realizes she hasn't heard your voice in a while, or that the person who used to care no longer seems to. And when that realization hits, it brings with it a weight, because she has to ask herself the hard question, did I push away someone who actually showed up for me? That question sticks. It doesn't fade with time, it deepens. And here's the irony. The more silent you are, the more noise it creates in her mind. Not the kind of noise that's angry or reactive, but the kind that unsettles the soul. Because silence from someone who genuinely cared isn't indifference, it's a boundary, it's self-respect, and is often the first time she truly has to consider your value without the comfort of knowing it's still available. You don't need to explain, to remind her, or to make her see it. The absence does the work, and in time it will say what words never could. Because sometimes the most powerful message isn't sent through speech, but through the discipline to say nothing at all.